globe. I hope you don't mind. I'm a walker, so I'm going to walk amongst you. I don't like standing behind podiums. It just feels very strange and awkward to me. So regardless of the lecture hall or the size, I walk amongst my audience. I'm also, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I made my living as a photographer before I went into academia. And so I slip in a lot of photos in my talks, and that's why I had Carly close some of our blinds so you can get a better look at what we're talking about. So let's start with this opening image that I think is particularly powerful. We have a Ku Klux Klan member that's just a toddler, that's about 2 years old, and he's admiring his own reflection in the riot gear of a black state trooper. Could you imagine getting the call that day as a black state trooper that your job is to protect a march by the Ku Klux Klan? Because the Ku Klux Klan are fully protected under the First Amendment in the United States. Hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. Hate literature is protected by the First Amendment. So the Ku Klux Klan have as much right to protest, as much right to assemble, as much right to celebrate as any other group in the U.S. And that's quite unique about the U.S. For example, I'm Canadian and it's illegal in Canada for them to congregate. I'm just going to start by pointing out something that may be obvious to everyone or perhaps not. That we are all exposed to stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination every minute of the day. It's, of course, they vary in severity. Some are life and death, some are, just silliness, sorry, I was going to use an example, I'm not, and others fall in between the two. And you'll see that, whatever social identity you're talking about, your race, ethnicity, your nationality, your gender, your sexual orientation, religion, physical disabilities, mental disabilities, height, weight, political affiliation, occupation, age, we all fall there somewhere, right? So we're all exposed to stereotypes at some point. And just to hit home how powerful this is, and that it starts at day one for every single one of us, let's look at this study that had an infant dressed in a white diaper. There is only one infant involved, always the same infant, always wearing a white diaper. Half the participants believed that they were interacting with a female infant. The other participants were randomly assigned to believe they're interacting with a male infant. If you're interacting with a boy, or thought you're interacting with a boy, you report he's less verbal, you sit further away, you give him a toy like a football, you call him things like tag or slugger, you report he's big, loud, and strong. The identical infant, now you think she's female? Look how your behavior changed. You coo more, you sit closer, you give her toys like a doll, you call her sweetheart and precious. You report she's small, quiet, and delicate. So how can we possibly avoid this? How can we possibly not be impacted by this? Because right from day one, we're shaped by our society. And if you fall outside of that, you get pushed back, right? Boys don't cry. Girls don't fight. Now, you would think that clinical psychologists would be better at this, considering that we're trained to see through people and to get to the core of the problem. In this study, all the subjects are clinical psychologists. So all the participants are registered clinical psychologists. And they're watching one video, the same video. Half of them are randomly assigned to think that they're watching a job applicant. And they report the job applicant is sincere, enthusiastic, pleasant, bright, candid, innovative, straightforward, and somewhat ingenious. And the truly scary part now is we tell them actually what you're looking at is a video of a mental patient, tight, rigid, conflicted, defensive, tries to seem brighter than he actually is, dependent, aggressive, impulsive, hostile, repressed. This is truly horrifying because if you go in for a psych assessment, that's 72 hours against your will. They take your phone away, and if you have a clinical psychologist that wants to see these things, this is called confirmation bias, right? It's kind of cute looking at a baby, and you can choose a toy, but a clinical psychologist, that means you may not get out of that institution. if they're looking for something and they see it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between explicit and implicit racism. Whenever you hear about the problems with racism or sexism or any type of ism declining in our society, it's always about explicit measures. And what I mean by that is you know exactly what we're tapping into. This would be you answering a questionnaire that says things like, do you think it's okay for white people to marry black people? That is an explicit measure of racism. And I just stole this from a recent journal published here in Britain, and it's called Declining Racial Prejudice in Britain. The question marks are my own. They were trying to make a very powerful statement here, and it's looking at interracial marriage and interethnic marriage, and it really doesn't matter what the groups are. You see the trend since 1940 is our attitudes are improving about interethnic or interracial marriage. But these are explicit measures. Maybe our attitudes are changing a little bit. But a lot of that change, a lot of what we're seeing there is an increase in political correctness. We know now as a society it's not appropriate to be racist. It's not appropriate to be outwardly sexist. This next study looks at changes from 6, 10 to adult years of your attitude about your own race. These are white participants, and asking you, do you prefer whites or blacks? And when we're 6 years old, as whites, we will say about 85% of us say we prefer whites to blacks. By 10, we say about 65% of us prefer whites to blacks. And by the way, there's nothing unique about whites and blacks here. We can interchange any race. This is a natural human phenomenon. We prefer our own race, we prefer our own ethnicity, we prefer our own religion. That's just human nature. By adults, believe it or not, adult whites are saying, no, actually I prefer blacks to whites. Right? A bend over backwards. They're so politically correct. They're saying, I love all blacks. Blacks are absolutely fantastic people, much better than white people. Then we give them an implicit measure designed by Mazarine Banaji, and that's what these 3 bars are here. And this is called the IAT, the Implicit Association Task. And it's just a little computer game. And you have to match as quickly as possible blacks to positive themes, blacks to negative themes, whites to positive themes, whites to negative themes. And they look at the disparity. How quick are you at matching the various races to positive or negative elements? And as you see there, on the 3 bars on the right, there is 0 difference in the level of prejudice between 6, 10, and adults. Those are all whites. They all like whites more than blacks. So that's a direct counter to those same individuals on an explicit measure, where as we get older, we say, we don't like whites more than blacks. We actually like blacks more than whites. And that when we give them an implicit measure, you see that that's just political correctness driving that. The reality is the prejudice is stable. I know it's an unfortunate message, but it's one that I will repeat. Here's one guy that's still comfortable with explicit measure. This is let me just read this for you. This is a white justice of the peace recently in New Orleans that refused to give a marriage license to an interracial couple. The husband was black, the wife was white, and he said it was out of concern for any children the couple might have. Keith Bardwell, the justice of the peace, said, I'm not a racist. I just don't believe in mixing the races that way. Well, Keith, I got some bad news for you. That's the definition of a racist. Bardwell told the Associated Press on Thursday, I have piles and piles of black friends. Interesting adjective. They come to my home, I marry them, they use my bathroom. Well, here's a product of a black father and a white mother that did quite well for himself. That is President Obama, and I'm showing you this photo because that little red-headed girl there is my niece Katya that he's talking to. And I absolutely love having Obama and one of my family members in the same photo. my wife was sitting over here is absolutely madly in love with Barack Obama. And I also love this photo because over here we have a guy just pretending to be another tourist, but look how stretched his golf shirt is over all the weaponry underneath there. That's his Secret Service agent. So, I'm going to tell you the story. Okay, so, probably isn't kosher, but what the hell. So, I'm in a surf shop in Hawaii, and it's a surf shop / shave ice store. Only in Hawaii do you get this combination. And so I'm looking through these shorts, and this huge, enormous human being comes up behind me and starts frisking me. I just go, oh, okay. I'm Canadian, we kind of let people do stuff like that. And so I don't have any problem, he just goes away, no word of explanation at all. And then a dog comes up and starts sniffing. I go, now that's something weird. And another huge mother of a guy comes up and goes, are you staying? And I go, I was planning on it. He goes, good, then you stay until I say you leave. I went, okay. And then, so I'm standing there, I don't know what to do anymore. Suddenly the shorts don't seem so interesting. And Obama walks into the shop with his 2 daughters to get a shaved ice. And this was the Secret Service preparing me for this. And so I sit there watching them get a shave ice, and I really casually pick up my phone and take a picture. I get one photo, and the guy goes, that's enough. And then when we came out, it was this chaos here. Here's a product of a white father and a white mother that didn't turn out so well. I have been really struggling with Trump since 1989. And I promised my class, I teach about 1,000 students a year, and I promised my students that I will eventually get through a lecture without mentioning Trump, but I haven't done it yet. And so I thought, well, I'm coming all the way to Cambridge, I don't want to embarrass Harvey, I'm not going to talk about, I'm going to talk about Trump, but only for 3 slides. So, this is, I'm not sure if you know the story, but this is Serge Kovalevsky on the right, exceptionally gifted reporter, highly acclaimed reporter, who suffers from a degenerative disorder that takes all the muscles and control from his right arm and hand. He was the one that broke the story that Trump lied about the thousands of Muslims celebrating when 9/11 went down. And so Trump said that he was in Jersey at the time, he was in New Jersey at the time, and he personally witnessed thousands of Muslims out celebrating in the streets when the towers came down. Serge Kovalevsky said, no, it didn't happen, proof it didn't happen. Now, since Trump couldn't question that because it was the truth, what he did is he physically mocked Serge and impersonated his disability during a presidential campaign. That's the man that is now the most powerful man in the world. My wife just turned 50, so we went to Rome on the way here for 5 days. They don't know who you are, don't worry. You can still lie about your age. Who's that 34-year-old back there? So she turned 34. We went to Rome to celebrate, and who shows up in Rome but Trump? Oh my God. My IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault. Thank you, Donald. And proving the fact, you know, it really doesn't matter what the media write about me, just as long as you've got a young and beautiful piece of ass. Now, vulgar sexism is usually not that extreme. Very few human beings would say something like that publicly, but sexism permeates our entire society still. In fact, if you read about Trump and Melania, his wife is the one on the right, if you read about Trump and Melania, he's made some weird comments about the daughter that I'm not going to get into. If you read about Trump and Melania, you'll read that it's a third marriage and stuff, but you won't read anything about the disparity in age. No one ever mentions the disparity in age. It's 24 years. Now try and read a story about the new president of France. The age disparity there, 24 years. But in the other direction. So you cannot get through an article in the world press without reading about it, just because one's more socially acceptable than the other. Deal with it. Okay. So 1989 happened, and this was a real turning point for me with Trump. Previous to this, he was just sort of a self-parody. You know, me generation, Trump Tower in Manhattan. But then he got involved in the Central Park 5. The Central Park 5, for those of you that don't remember, 1989, a very successful 28-year-old woman is jogging through Central Park and is viciously attacked. I mean, the most brutal, heinous crime you could imagine. Sexually molested, fractured skull, multiple places. One of her eyes is no longer in her skull. They find her several hours later, and they assume she's dead. They actually are able to revive her. She's in a coma for a while. She's made a remarkable recovery. She still has paralysis and is blind in one eye. But of course, she has no memory of the events, including who attacked her, which was this serial rapist right here. But then something incredible happens. The New York Police Department arrests 5 boys for the crime, and they're aged 14 to 16. Then they bring them in for interrogation, and some of the worst interrogation techniques you'll ever hear of. They separate the 5 boys. They're kept in the room for up to 30 hours without a bathroom break, without calling a lawyer, without seeing a parent, without getting any food. And they're told things like, just tell us what happened, just tell us you did it, and you can go right home. Your mom's just waiting outside. Of course, none of them went home again. So after 30 hours, all 5 boys had pleaded guilty to 5 very distinct crimes because they weren't there. They didn't know anything about it. And it was, so they just made up 5 stories that were completely unique, had no overlap whatsoever. And they had Matthias Reis, they had the serial rapist, they had his DNA, and they already knew it didn't match any of the 5 boys. And so they thought, oh, they're protecting a 6th boy. So 13 years later, the serial rapist admits to the crime, brags about it in prison. And so they do a DNA test, prove that it was him, and the boys are released after 13 years. Why am I telling you this? Because in 1989, Donald Trump spent $85,000 putting full-page ads in each one of the 4 daily newspapers asking for capital punishment to be reinstated in the state of New York so that these children could be executed. In that ad, it read, bring back the death penalty. They should be forced to suffer, and they should be executed for their crimes. After they were released in 2014, the mayor of New York at the time said, you know, we've got to do something about this. This is an incredible misjustice, and we've got to have a financial settlement with these 5 kids, who are no longer kids, by the way. Then, during the presidential campaign, so just last year, a reporter asked about this and asked about the settlement. And here, Trump had an opportunity to go, you know, I had it wrong. I thought the police had it right. I thought they knew what they were doing. I got overexcited and I apologized. But Trump doesn't admit he's wrong. Trump will never admit he's wrong. What he'll do is he'll double down. That settlement is a disgrace. They should be very thankful I wasn't mayor because they wouldn't have gotten a dime. They owe the taxpayers in the city of New York an apology for taking money out of their pockets like candy from a baby. Here's one of the children he wanted to kill. That's Kerry Weiss the night that he was interrogated for 30 hours. Look how young that kid is. That's one of the 5 boys. This is the day he's released from prison, what Kerry Weiss looks like. Okay, so do you remember when I started talking about the Central Park 5 and I put up that mug shot of that serial rapist and it was about 4 by 6 feet or 2 by 3 meters and it was up there for about a minute and the lighting was perfect and you were looking straight at him? and he didn't have a gun on you, and he wasn't running by, he wasn't doing nothing, you weren't scared, you had a perfect look at him. I'm going to ask you to do something very simple, people. I'm going to ask you to pick him out of a lineup for me. That's 150 people getting nervous. I'm going to show you a six-pack, which is what the police use. And I'm going to go through the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. And every one of you has to answer. I'm watching. You're being videotaped. And I'll just get you a show of hands when you see the serial rapist that committed that crime. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, how many people think it's number 1? Show of hands. Nobody. How many people think it's number 2? Show of hands. Shoot, I completely blew it. See, this is the problem. When you talk to a crowd that's this intelligent, it throws you all off. You know, okay. So tell me how you knew it was him. Let's try and salvage that. How did you know it was him? What were the aspects that told you it was him? That made you confident? The tilt of the head. Well, we're not going to execute anyone for a tilt of the head. Let's go deeper than a tilt of the head. Yeah. Yes, a very broad face. Facial hair looked right. What else? Piercing eyes. Piercing eyes. Good. What else? The lighting. Okay. Sorry? His bone structure. Excellent. What else? So these are all the things we look for, right, when we're identifying people in eyewitness testimony. There's just one little problem, people. It's not him. That's not the man I showed you. That is. So we just sent an innocent man to prison for 30 years. You can't ask for a brighter room than this, and you sure as hell can't get a better look at a human being than that. Most of us are asked to come back 6 months, a year later. They've changed their hair. They've changed their facial hair. They're dressed differently. They pointed a gun at you. It was dark out. They were running. We have a terrible look at people. And eyewitness testimony is atrocious. 75% of all false convictions in North America are based on faulty eyewitness testimony. 75%. Because we feel very strongly about it. When we think we know someone, and that's him. That's a very powerful moment in court. That's him. And so we rely on eyewitness testimony far more than we should. 349 people have been exonerated so far since DNA testing came into the mainstream in the 1990s. 20 served time on death row. But in fact, we know a lot more than that serve time on death row, because if they actually execute them, they won't give us their DNA. Because it's a no-win situation for us to say, oh, you actually executed an innocent guy. So once they're executed, that's gone. But we know that 20 of them served time on death row. 14 years was the average length of these people falsely accused because of that. That is O.J. Simpson. Who's that? Those are the Kardashians. That's good for you. Most people don't recognize the Kardashians. This was before the Kardashians were household names. And so that's Robert Kardashian and Kris Kardashian. You know her better as Kris Jenner. And then this is Nicole Simpson, who O.J. murdered. Now, allegedly murdered. Now, after the murder, Robert Kardashian, who was a lawyer, joined the Dream Team. And so the four of them were best friends. So Robert joins the Dream Team, and Kris Kardashian, the wife, sits with Nicole's family at each day of the trial. So this is the first time we get to know the Kardashians. It divides the family. We have the lawyer for the defense and the wife with the prosecution. Of course, the daughters make a couple sex tapes, and we're stuck with them for life. Never-ending Kardashians. And so here is the week after O.J.'s arrest. O.J. was arrested by the LAPD. They took the arresting photo, and that's it on the left. That's an actual photo that the LAPD took. That's what Newsweek broadcast. Look what Time did to the photo. What'd they do there? They made him more black. Why would they make him more black?
More sinister?
Sorry?
More sinister looking?
Absolutely. Make him more sinister looking. Make him more scary looking. Make him look more guilty. More like a wife killer. Which is interesting that they knew that, and on some unconscious level, our society knew that, but no one was doing research about it. Because we didn't start doing research about it until several years later. And we started looking at whether perceived stereotypicality could impact whether someone's judged to be a criminal or not. And by that, we need a darker skin tone. This is Thomas, this is Cameron. Thomas has a darker skin tone, a broader nose, and fuller lips than Cameron. Does that make him scarier looking? Does that make him more look like a criminal? And so we decided to go right to the source. Let's go to the cops. So I was at Stanford at the time, so I went around Stanford and took photos of a bunch of black male students. None of them having criminal records, of course, basically bright undergrads. And I took a bunch of photos, headshots, so they're like mug shots. And then I took them to the police. And I randomly assigned the police either to rate them on stereotypicality. They're very comfortable doing this, by the way, because they often identify people during a call-out by how stereotypic they are. So highly stereotypic black man, low stereotypic black man, and then the age. They have codes for it. And so they're very comfortable rating the stereotypicality of the photos, less comfortable rating the attractiveness. It's incredible, right? Homophobia is just alive and well still. So they say things like, I don't know, how would I know whether another dude's attractive or not? So we got them to rate the attractiveness. This is very important because in North America, stereotypicality is negatively correlated with attractiveness. That is, all things being equal, the more highly stereotypic you are, the less attractive you're going to be rated. So we want to make sure it was stereotypicality that was driving our findings, not attractiveness, because attractiveness is an incredible predictor of sentencing, of criminal, all sorts of things. That's another lecture. And then we had the cops guess, yes or no, whether they're a criminal. So we just lined up all the ratings of stereotypicality of all our Stanford students, just find the middle one, and on the left, we say that's low stereotypic. On the right, we say that's high stereotypic. Low stereotypic, about 25% the cops thought were criminal. High stereotypic, closer to 40. So cops are seeing stereotypicality as an indicator of criminality. Straight up, no way around it. By the way, Thomas is an award-winning kindergarten teacher from San Francisco. Might as well shatter some stereotypes while we're here. Then we thought, well, how far can we ramp this up? How far can we push this? Would it actually impact sentencing, how stereotypically black you are? And then the ultimate sentencing decision is whether you get life or death, right? And so what we did is we got 470 cases of everyone charged with murder one in the state of Pennsylvania. And in the state of Pennsylvania, you only have two options. One is life in prison, two is death. That's it, no other options. And so these are two of our people. So the guy on the left is less stereotypically black, the guy on the right is more stereotypically black. The guy on the left robbed a pharmacy and killed the owner, the guy on the right robbed a beauty shop and killed the owner. This guy got life, this guy got death, but that's only one, that means nothing, right? So what we did is we got all 470, and we had over 2,000 variables on each one of these guys. So we knew everything about the crime, everything about the trial, and everything about the victim. We had our undergrads rate the mug shots on stereotypicality and attractiveness. Again, we got a control for attractiveness. And then we hired a lawyer, and we said, what predicts capital sentencing? What do we have to control for in this data set? What are the primary factors that are going to determine whether someone gets sentenced to death or not? Aggravating circumstances, mitigating circumstances, the severity of the murder, the defendant's SES, that's socioeconomic status, that's wealth and class and education. I mean, OJ spent $6 million on his defense of his personal funds and got off, so we can see how powerful defendant's SES is. Victim's SES and defendant's attractiveness, all major predictors. So we control for all those, but really it doesn't matter, you can control for all 2,000, and the picture is the same. This is real data. So when you see a bar go up on that graph, that means those people are dead now. They were sentenced to death and executed. Low stereotypic, so we just, again, rate them all, level of stereotypicality, cut. Low stereotypic, cut. High stereotypic, very conservative test. 24% chance of being sentenced to death. 58% chance of being sentenced to death. When we published this, Jennifer Everhart and I did this research together. When we published this data, the legal communities freaked out. They said, no way. So we gave them our data set and said, control for whatever you want. The story is going to be the same. And it is. It's incredibly robust. There is no way to look at this data other than when you control for all other factors known to man, that we value the lives of highly stereotypic black men less in the U.S. legal system. Period. Want another example of that? In the U.S., perpetrators who murder a white female are 14.5 times more likely to be sentenced to death than perpetrators who murder a black male. 14.5 times. There's no positive spin you can put on data like that. So then we started thinking, well, is there something about the crime itself? Can we have stereotypic black crimes and non-stereotypic black crimes? And could that impact whether we get false identification and errors in eyewitness testimony? So we did a lot of testing. We found that drive-by shooter was a highly stereotypic black crime, and serial killer was a low stereotypic black crime, but importantly, just as violent, obviously, as drive-by shooter. And then we simply had our undergrads watch the same video of a man who's moderately stereotypic leaving a building. And in one case, we told them, you're about to watch a serial killer walk out of this building. In the other, we told them, you're about to watch a drive-by shooter walk out of this building. In the other, our control condition, you're about to watch a man walk out of this building. And then we got them to look at a morph. And so this is my student Cameron, and if you remember, his level of stereotypicality is right about here, at 50. What I've done is I've taken him into Photoshop, and here I've made him less stereotypically black than he is. Here I've made him more stereotypically black than he is, just through skin pigment, breadth of nose, and fullness of lips. And I gave them a morph that went from frame 1 to frame 100 seamlessly in 10 seconds. And they just had to hit the space bar when they saw the man leaving the building. When you recognize the man as he was portrayed in the video, just hit the space bar. 50 was the actual level of stereotypicality. If they watched what they thought was a serial killer, they got it dead on 50. No crime, 50. What if they thought they were watching a drive-by shooter? They falsely remember him as being more stereotypically black than he actually is. They're turning him into a prototype of the criminal. This is a highly stereotypic black crime, so it must be a highly stereotypic black man that is doing it. And of course, this can lead to all sorts of eyewitness errors. Another incredible image. I'm sure you're aware of all the shootings by police of unarmed black men in the U.S. That's led to all sorts of things, including the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm going to show you 7 of the men in order of age that were killed despite being unarmed. Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri. This really started the latest wave. All sorts of social unrest and rioting throughout the U.S. Because of this shooting. Christian Taylor, 19, from Texas. Jamar Clark, 24, Minneapolis. Brendan Glenn, 29, California. Terrence Crutcher, 40, Oklahoma. Du Bois, 43, Ohio. Walter Scott, 50, South Carolina. And I absolutely love this image. It's just so majestic. This woman standing her ground at a Black Lives Matter event while the riot police come to arrest her. It's just something magical about this image. This is what got me going. This is Amadou Diallo. This is in 1999. I was doing my PhD at the time. And Amadou Diallo is an immigrant from Guinea, and he was living in New York. He came home from work one night, was going up to his walk-up apartment building in New York, steps on the outside, locked at the top. He was up the steps, and two cars came to a screaming halt right down at the base of the steps. They were two cars filled with undercover police officers who had received a call that a serial rapist was in the neighborhood. And the serial rapist was about a 20-year-old, highly stereotypic black man. So fit Amadou Diallo's description was not him. He had nothing to do with it. Just wrong place, wrong time. Amadou was ESL. They screamed to a stop. They came out with their guns, pointed at him. He did something that I think was completely natural and reasonable. He opened his jacket and pulled out his wallet, and they shot him 41 times. So Amadou died on the stairs that day. And this was the first time that Josh Corral and myself started looking at perceived stereotypicality and wondering would that have happened with the white guy? Is because he's highly stereotypic. Was that part of the trigger for the police officers? And so here's Cameron again. And so this is how we do it. By the way, I always use different targets, and there's hundreds of targets. It's just that Cameron, my student, has signed waivers that allow me to show him and talk. So this isn't always the guy in my research. It's just poor Cameron. It's just simply for demonstration purposes. So here's Cameron pointing a wallet at you as Amadou did. Are you less likely to shoot low stereotypic Cameron than you are high stereotypic Cameron? And how about a white guy? And so I was interested in comparing the three. And so Josh Corral and I created this video game, very simple, just flashes a photo on the screen. And you have to answer as quickly as possible. Shoot, don't shoot. You just press a key on the keyboard. You only have half a second to make your decision. And it's either a white person, a low stereotypic black person, or a highly stereotypic black person. And the person's either got a gun or no gun. In the no gun condition, he could have a pop can, he could have a phone, he could have a wallet. And if the instructions are very simple. If you see a gun, it doesn't matter if it's pointing at you or not. If you see a gun, you shoot. If you don't see a gun, don't shoot. So simply shoot, don't shoot. Shoot, don't shoot. 144 trials, and what we're looking at here are errors. First, we're going to start with the highly stereotypic. So on the left, we have guns, no gun, amount of errors. High stereotypic in the red bars. This is Amadou Diallo case. That is, we are more likely to make errors in the no gun condition, that is shoot an unarmed man. How about low stereotypic black? We get a reversal of pattern. Now we're giving them benefit of the doubt. We're more likely not to shoot an armed man. And how about whites? Even higher in that same direction, the benefit of the doubt. But here's the problem. It's a very complicated story, and it's not a story the police want to hear. And it's not a story the media want to hear. So when I showed you those 7 victims that had all been killed by police officers despite being unarmed, you probably immediately thought, white racist cop. Some of them were shot by white men. But some of those 7 were also shot by black men, and some of those 7 were also shot by women. It's not a black-white issue. We ran this study with the police and found the exact same results. They are human after all. They showed the exact same impact. And the thing that people have a hard time getting their head around and don't like to hear is our very final study was we ran it with black participants. And they showed the same pattern too. Blacks are more likely to accidentally shoot an unarmed, highly stereotypic black than a low stereotypic black or a white. So I don't think it's simply a black-white issue. I think it's a black-blue issue. And that's going to be hard for us to solve. Because it doesn't matter who's in the uniform. They're more likely to make that tragic error with highly stereotypic black men. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I was wondering if all of your studies you did in the US, right? Or have you been
We've been running them in Canada as well, but the ones I showed today were the US.
Okay. Have you found, in what you've studied and from your own knowledge, would you anticipate any major differences between the US and Canada and the US, and you have people from Auckland,
Yes.
New Zealand, Australia, even here in Great
Yes.
Britain?
Unfortunately not. We've been, so we've now run in Auckland, New Zealand, in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Kelowna, British Columbia, in San Francisco, in LA, and we're seeing no material differences. The content of the stereotypes differ, but the behavioral effects are the same. What I mean by that is there's a strong negative stereotype in the US linking blacks to welfare. That stereotype does not exist in Canada at all. But the critical ones that we investigate, the link between black, and you should also notice, if it's not clear, we're looking at black males because the stereotype is far stronger for black males than it is for black females. And that key danger, aggressiveness, criminal component is the same everywhere we've looked so far. But all Western places, predominantly white places, of course. Yeah.
Can you pick one?
I'll talk to everyone. I got nothing.
I assume what you talk about is the white race, is that white people's judgment on the black people. But how about the stereotype between the black people and black people and other minorities within themselves?
Yep, absolutely. And so with the shoot don't shoot, we've done and found very similar results with the blacks being the participants as the whites. We've also run, I should point out, we've run Asians that show the same effect as participants. But there is no doubt that there is serious shadeism within the black community as well, which is a term that Canadians use. I don't know if that's a term that's appropriate here or not. That highly stereotypic black men are associated with some stereotypes stronger than low stereotypic black men. There's lots of people that argue that there's no way Obama, it's not by chance he's a low stereotypic black man. It's not by chance. America's not ready for a highly stereotypic black man president.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have observed on many occasions when we look at these cases where police brutality, the first thing that is done is as soon as they stop someone, they have to go down on the ground.
Yes.
And you pointed out it's a black and blue issue.
Yes.
So what I am assuming it's a training and there's some brainwashing going on in layman's terms. So what are they going to be doing about that?
We try to instigate something. So in the 70s and 80s, in all firearms training, if you've watched the Clint Eastwood films, you would have seen it, pop-ups. They never used black guys or Latino guys because they thought it'd be racist to be practicing shooting at them. And we pointed out it's the exact opposite. You need firearms training with highly stereotypic black men that come up that do not have a weapon. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so you're making that critical judgment with highly stereotypic black men. And so actually they've started importing now in San Francisco and LA County, the Sheriff's Department, and in LAPD, more minorities in their shooting training. And I think that's a great thing. So you get accustomed to it. Sometimes they're a threat, sometimes not a threat.
I'm going to go with this, and I know, I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much, Professor. I really appreciate your talk. I had a question that kind of follows up on the previous question, but it's about the nature of training and whether there is any variation and the culture of the police. Depending on within the U.S., but also across Europe and in the West. So, for example, there was a report by the Justice Department that suggested that a number of the police departments that were involved in unarmed black men killings, like Baltimore and Ferguson, were kind of complicit in a conspiracy to target this specific community. And whether or not it's more of a question of the social kind of fabric of society versus the kind of police training, or whether there's some intersection there, and whether there's any variation, for example, because I know the policing techniques, for example, in the UK are a bit more soft compared to North America, whether you see any variation in that.
Absolutely do. That's you made some extremely good points there. I'll try to keep that apart. Very often, where we're seeing the worst brutalities are in incredibly poor environments. and like one is New Orleans. And a cop in New Orleans, the starting salary is something like $27,000 a year. You can't live on $27,000 a year. And New Orleans is one of the most dangerous cities in North America, which means one of the most dangerous cities in the Western world. So what you create here, you're not valuing police as a part of your society, right? First you have to lift up the police, celebrate them, give them a livable wage, and give them something to aspire to be celebrated again, rather than what you do, if you pay them at the bottom of your social standard, then the people applying are going to be down there, a lot like we get in the military. That if you don't pay them properly, you don't celebrate them properly, and you don't train them properly, it's a nightmare scenario. So yes, that's very much the case. The problem is that it's hard to tease apart because there's so many confounding factors. Like, so you have private police forces in Grosse Pointe in Detroit. You have private police forces in Bel Air, in Beverly Hills, in Santa Monica, in Westwood. These incredibly wealthy places where the training is exceptional, but part of that training is keeping undesired out. So if you ever drive into, where are you from?
From Texas.
You're from Bay! All right. I was just down in talking San Antonio in January. If you drive into Grosse Pointe in Detroit, Grosse Pointe is a suburb of Detroit. Detroit is on hard times, has been on hard times for 20 years. And when my wife and I were driving, my 34-year-old wife and I were driving into Grosse Pointe, there were like burning mattresses on the street in Detroit. You get past there, you get into Grosse Pointe proper, and there are no people of color. I mean none. The police force is white, the community is white. Are they well trained? Yes. Is there no crime there? Yes. But the problem is that those people are getting paid so well, and that's such a desirable position to go to these forces, it's hard to get them to go to Arlington. It's hard to get them to go to New Orleans, to take that incredible pay cut, and also to enter into a culture where they're not celebrated. They're not, you see the cops coming and it raises fear. So it's an incredibly complicated social issue, and I wish I knew the answer to it. But personally, after spending so much the last 20 years with these men and women, I wish we celebrated police officers more, and I wish we celebrated our military more. So both of them get proper training, and both of them get the cream of the crop applying to be a part of that culture, rather than the dredges of our society, which sometimes happens. Thank you for that question.
You can just pass the mic. Oh, sorry. Let's do that.
Thank you for the talk. It's great. I myself is a psychologist as well, so that's why I find it fascinating. I have maybe a very stupid question. So, have you considered, for example, the base rate of the crime? For example, when people make judgment and even though it's stereotyped judgment, and make function in certain way, make people make this kind of judgment. For example, the highly stereotyped black may actually just have higher crime rate. And people base this on a base rate to make this kind of judgment. How do you?
That's not a stupid question at all. That's one we have to address all the time. It was a big one in our death penalty study. That a very quick counter-argument to that was, the highly stereotypic black guys are just doing more heinous crimes and more often than the low stereotypic black guys. And so in that study it's pretty easy to address because they have a severity of murder index, which is literally an index from 1 to 10 on how severe the murder is, so like decapitation being a 10 all the way down. And so we're able to control that out. And so in those cases, we can address that directly. That if we covary out the variance due to that type of crime, the severity of the crime, the impact is still there. It actually had very little impact whether we covaried it out or not. But in other scenarios, in other paradigms, it's a much harder thing to address in getting back to a societal thing, right? Because it is related to wealth as well. And in the States, it's impossible to talk about race and wealth separately because they are so intertwined in the States.
Both over here. Can you pass the mic over here? Oh, sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
I was wondering how you fit moral responsibility into this picture. So it seems that one reason why we want to punish somebody who's explicitly racist is that it make them twice, and make others think twice. If we were to treat people who have this implicit racism as if it's explicit racism, would that have a similar effect? So when the cops shoot the innocent person 41 times and they all go to prison if it's explicit racism, that might then deter it later, or would you think that's unfair because it's implicit, it's done in a fraction of a second, you can't really hold them responsible for it, but then who is responsible for it?
This is a hotly debated issue because implicit attitudes don't always link to behavior, right? It's not a direct link. So just because you respond this way on a shoot, don't shoot, doesn't predict your behavior 100% out there. So you can't really judge anything. And I highly recommend you guys going on the IAT site, the Implicit Association Test site. It's Masri Bonanti at Harvard. And you can check your bias towards the elderly. You can check your bias towards Republicans, to Black people, to Asian people, to Muslims, to Christians. Doesn't matter. There's all sorts of things you can check your bias towards. And I think it's very helpful to get this knowledge about our implicit biases so we're conscious of it, we're cognizant of it, and it may impact you. And what happens with the police, and this is much more Josh Burrell, an old partner of mine, this is much more his work, is once they identify the bias, they can actually work on that. So, in the shoot, don't shoot paradigm, if you show a bias towards shooting blacks more than Latinos, than Asians, than whites, through repetitive training with the shoot, don't shoot, we can eliminate that bias. With the hope, of course, being that we can eliminate the behavioral bias as well. But hard test, right? But we'll do what we can.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so very much for your talk. It was really, really fascinating. I've got two questions. I hope you don't mind me widening the scope just a little bit. The first question is, why do we stereotype? And the second is stereotyping ever useful?
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask this is because of two reasons. The first reason is, based on my very limited reading, I understand that we evolved to stereotype because of our origins, from being hunter-gatherers, and we need to develop mental shortcuts to decide what we need to do in our life in that situation. And secondly, in medicine, for instance, we use stereotype a lot. Pattern recognition is so important, and it's useful. But in your line of work, I'm really fascinated to hear
Absolutely, socially it can be very useful too. To get to the first question, do we need stereotypes? We absolutely need stereotypes because humans are cognitive misers. They use as few resources as possible. It would be virtually impossible for me to address each one of you as individuals with no preconception of how your gender or your ethnicity or your profession impacts you. All those things, all that information you just gave me has shaped the stereotype in my mind that helps our relationship go smoothly. That's very important. So we can perceive threat, no threat. And we do it with everything, not just humans, right? We look at this, we look at this, it's a chair. We don't go, oh, this object is leather, it has arms, it has 4 legs, that's interesting, I'm wondering what it's used for. We just chair, right? That's stereotype. We do that all the time, not just with humans, but all sorts of things, which kind of gets to your medicine point. Is it helpful? It can be very helpful. For example, my wife's parents are Mennonite, which means fundamentalist Christian, which means I know there's certain topics I shouldn't bring up at the dinner table, like dinosaurs, you know? So it can be very helpful to navigating all our societal things. And it can also help you stay clear of things, because we're social animals, and so the goal for most of us as social animals is to make things go smoothly. You ever want to play an experiment with your friends and kind of screw around with them? If you're standing around with a bunch of friends, do something odd with your hands. Put both your hands in your pocket. And then do this. And then put one leg in there. And watch everyone in the group do it. And it's 100% unconscious. It's called the chameleon effect. And it's just our way of saying, I like you, keep things going smoothly. You're nodding slowly, telling me to keep talking. When you want to talk, you nod fast. You know, shut up, now move on. These are all cues that we use. And some of them are conscious, some of them are unconscious. And absolutely, we use them and we need them. So they're not all bad, by any stretch of imagination.
Hi, thank you so much. wanted to ask possibly a more personal question. Earlier today, we talked about both activism and allyship.
Yep.
And I'm curious if you view yourself as either an activist or an ally, and if so, how those roles interact or don't interact with your role as an academic.
First and foremost, I view myself as a teacher, and so my primary drive always is my students and whatever my students need. And so when I, at Stanford, I was the token white guy. I was the only white guy. Everyone in my lab was black. I've had labs where everyone was gay except for me. I'm straight. And then currently, I'm the only male in the lab. And so my needs and the needs of my students adapt. And so I don't have any one call in life. I have a huge sense of social responsibility, but my first and foremost need and desire is the well-being of my students, so I give them whatever they need, however I can, but I definitely don't try to mold them or make them little me's or anything like that. I'm not sure if that answers your